Come immediately. I'm stuck in traffic and won't make it to you in time. Your son has arranged everything so that... That was the message from my lawyer I started to read but never finished. I was standing by my wife's grave when the phone buzzed in my pocket for the 10th time. I remember thinking I'd turn it off completely. I came here to talk to Susan, not to stare at a glowing screen. It was a gray morning, the kind where the sky feels like an old damp blanket pressing down on your shoulders. I'd brought roses like always, red ones, because she used to say white flowers looked like surrender, and she'd never surrendered to anything in her life, not even in that last week when the doctors whispered words like palliative and no more options in the hallway. I put the flowers in the metal vase, brushed away a few dry leaves, and stayed there, just breathing. 68 years old, and I still felt like a boy when I stood in front of that stone. "Hi, Suze," I said quietly. "I know I came yesterday too. You probably get tired of looking at me, but I needed to talk. Again." The phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. "I had another fight with Jason," I went on. "About money. About the company. Same story. You know him. He wants everything at once." I shrugged. "I'm tired, you know. I'm not 25, but that doesn't mean I'm a fool either." The phone kept buzzing insistently, like an insect trapped in fabric. I sighed and finally pulled it out, only because it wouldn't stop. 20 missed calls. 5 from my lawyer, David. 10 from an unknown number. 5 from home. A couple of text messages. 1 from David. "Come immediately. I'm stuck in traffic and won't make it to you in time. Your son has arranged everything so that..." That was where I stopped reading, because at that moment a hand gripped my shoulder from behind, hard, fingers like pliers. "Mr. Miller?" a male voice asked. I turned, already annoyed. "Yes, what is..." 3 men stood there. Big, broad-shouldered, all in the same dark blue uniform jackets with no badges. They were the kind of men you see lifting gurneys out of ambulances. The kind of men who are used to people struggling. I barely got my phone halfway back into my pocket before the first one grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back. Pain shot up to my shoulder. "What are you doing? Let go!" I snapped. "Careful, he's agitated," another one said calmly. Agitated. I looked at them, at the grave, at the empty path nearby. No one. It was a weekday morning. Normal people were at work. Only the dead and an old idiot like me. "Have you lost your minds?" I tried to pull free. I'm not weak. I worked most of my life, and my shoulders remember every sheet of drywall, every crate. But age has its own arithmetic, and 3 young bulls against 1 old man is not a fair equation. "Easy, sir," the third one said, grabbing my other arm. "We're here to help you." "Help?" I barked. "You call this help? I don't need help. I'm at my wife's grave, not on a bridge railing. Let me go." The first one already had some sort of strap in his hand. They turned me, pushed me forward. My phone slipped from my fingers and fell into the wet grass. "Hey! My phone! Let me..." Too late. My arms were pinned, my back bent, my shoes slipping on the gravel of the cemetery path as they half walked, half dragged me toward the gate. I saw the security guard from the corner of my eye. He glanced at us, then away, as if it was none of his business. "Call the police!" I shouted at him. "This is kidnapping!" He had the decency to look uncomfortable, but he didn't move. Outside the cemetery, a gray van stood waiting with its rear doors open. No logo, no numbers, just gray. The kind of vehicle that could belong to a plumber, a courier service, or a nightmare. "Gentlemen," I tried to keep my voice steady. "I think there's been a mistake. I'm not going anywhere with you. You understand? You have no right to..." The first one leaned close to my ear. His breath smelled of coffee and mint. "Sir, you can go quietly," he murmured. "Or we can restrain you. It's your choice." But the doctor already signed the papers. "What doctor?" I demanded. "What papers?" They didn't answer. They pushed me into the van. Inside it smelled of disinfectant and old rubber. There were 2 narrow benches along the walls. No windows, just a small one in the back door, too high to see much. One of the men climbed in with me. The other 2 shut the doors and went to the front. I lurched as the van started moving. "Listen to me," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. "I'm not crazy. I'm not drunk. I'm not anything. I'm a businessman. My name is Robert Miller. I own Miller Construction. I have documents, cards, everything. You're making a mistake." The orderly, a square-headed man with a shaved skull, watched me with the same expression you'd give a barking dog. Bored, slightly wary. "Sir," he said, "I'm just doing my job." "And your job is to kidnap people from cemeteries? Your son signed the application. We have a court order, psychiatric referral. All legal. If you're normal, the doctors will see it. If you're not—" He shrugged. Blood roared in my ears. "My son?" I whispered. "Jason?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The van drove in silence. I tried to wriggle my hands free, but the straps were tight. I raised my voice. I shouted that I'd demanded a lawyer, that they had no right. No one answered from the front. The engine's drone swallowed my words. I don't know how long we drove. Time becomes strange when you don't see the road. Finally, the van jerked to a stop. The doors opened. Blinding daylight flooded the dim interior. A high concrete fence, metal gates, a building with barred windows on the lower floors. I realized where they had brought me before I saw the sign. Psychiatric hospital. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound came out raw and hoarse. "You've got to be kidding," I muttered. "This is insane. I came to bring flowers to my wife, and now I'm going to a psych ward. At least give me back my phone. I'll call my lawyer. He'll shove your papers." They didn't react. They took me by the elbows, led me across the yard. The gate clanged behind us. Inside, the air smelled of bleach, boiled food, and something else. Stale despair. People sat on benches along the corridor. Some stared at the floor. Some murmured to themselves. One tall, bony man watched me with sharp, clear eyes, but said nothing. At the admissions desk, a nurse in a white coat took my name and date of birth as if I were checking into a hotel. "Do you know where you are?" she asked. "In hell," I said. "And I'd like to leave immediately." She made a note. "In your own words," she went on. "What happened today?" "In my own words?" I leaned toward her. "My son has lost his mind and should be in the bed you're preparing for me. I was visiting my wife's grave when 3 gorillas grabbed me and dragged me here." "When did your wife die?" she asked without looking up. "1.5 years ago." "Since then, have you noticed any changes in your mood, sleep, appetite?" "Yes," I snapped. "I became a widower. That tends to change a person." The nurse's pen scratched away. The orderlies waited patiently behind me like they had all the time in the world. They took my pressure, listened to my heart, drew blood. Then they led me into a small office where a man in a white coat with kind eyes and a tired face sat behind a desk. His nameplate read, "Dr. Hayes, Psychiatrist." "Mr. Miller," he said, "please sit." "I'll stand." "As you wish." He folded his hands. "Your son is worried about you. He says you've been depressed, talking about wanting to join your wife, that you've been giving away money, making strange decisions at the company." I stared at him. For a moment I had no words. "My son," I said slowly, "is an idiot. A greedy idiot. That's his diagnosis. And if anyone needs treatment, it's him." "Have you had thoughts of suicide?" he asked, calm as a metronome. "No," I snapped. "Any hallucinations? Hearing your wife's voice?" "I talk to her grave," I admitted. "I talk out loud. That's called grief, not psychosis." "Have you been sleeping?" "Badly, like every man whose wife died and whose son wants to turn the company into a casino." Do you drink? Sometimes, not enough for this. I gestured at the door. Dr. Hayes sighed, wrote something down, then looked up at me. Your son brought documents to the court, he said. It is an emergency request for involuntary admission. He attached recordings of your conversations, statements from 2 employees about your strange behavior, and a referral from a private psychiatrist who examined you last week. Last week? I repeated. I haven't been to any psychiatrist. He claims you refused treatment and left early. I haven't been to any psychiatrist, I repeated, slowly, distinctly. Your private colleague, if he exists, lied. He watched me for a moment. His gaze was professional, not unkind. I'm not the court, he said quietly. My job is to assess your current state. You are agitated, angry, understandably, but you are oriented in place, time, and situation. Your speech is coherent. I don't see clear signs of psychosis right now. Good, I said through clenched teeth. So we're done. Call a taxi. I'm going home. However, he went on, the court order is valid for 72 hours. We are required by law to admit you for observation. If after that time you remain stable, we can discharge you. If not, you keep me, I finished. Against my will. That is how the system works. I leaned both hands on the desk. I wanted to reach over, grab him by his coat, demand he tear up whatever paper the court had sent. But one look at the orderlies behind the door, at the straps they carried, told me how that would end. Doctor, I said, listen to me as a human being. My son and I argued about money, about the company I built. He wants a shortcut. I don't. That's all. I'm not crazy. I'm not suicidal. I'm just old and tired and angry, but not insane. In 3 days, my company can be destroyed. Something in my voice must have reached him. His eyes softened. I will note that you are sane and oriented, he said. I will recommend minimal sedation. If you cooperate, it will be easier to discharge you quickly. If you resist, they will decide you're dangerous. Do you understand? I understood. But understanding didn't stop the cold knot in my stomach. They took my belt, my watch, my wallet, my keys. My phone was still lying somewhere in the cemetery grass. They gave me a faded hospital robe and slippers. My clothes went into a plastic bag. The first day, I tried to follow the doctor's advice. I answered questions politely. I walked around the ward. I counted doors, cameras, the times the nurses did their rounds. I asked for my phone, for a call to my lawyer. They shook their heads. No phones allowed, they said. You can call family on the ward phone during visiting hours. My family put me here, I reminded them. I don't need to call them. The second day, I realized that every polite request, every calm argument, went into the same black hole as yelling would. The system didn't care if I was cooperative or not. The system cared about forms and signatures. The third day, I asked for my medication list. A young intern handed me a flimsy paper. Antipsychotic, tranquilizer, sleeping pill. I don't need these, I told him. It's standard protocol, he said, not meeting my eyes. I don't care if it's standard in the Stone Age. I won't take them. He shrugged. The nurse brought the pills anyway. I refused. She wrote something on my chart and walked away with tight lips. An hour later, when I raised my voice at the head nurse about the phone again, 2 orderlies came in. Mr. Miller, please calm down, one said. I am calm, I said. I am calm for a man who has been illegally kidnapped and imprisoned in a psych ward while his son empties his bank accounts. We need to give you an injection, the other said. You can try, I snapped. They didn't try. They did. They held my arms. The nurse pushed the needle into my shoulder, and the world dissolved. A week flew by unnoticed. That's not a figure of speech. Time literally vanished. I woke, swallowed pills I couldn't fight, slept, stared at the ceiling, listened to distant screams, slept again. Thoughts came like raindrops and slid away before I could hold them. No plans, no anger, no fear, no Susan, no Jason, no company, just fog. When the fog finally began to thin, I realized I had lost 7 days of my life. 7 days when I didn't fight. 7 days when my son had free access to everything I owned. I sat on the narrow bed, my head clearer than it had been in days, and tried to remember. The last week before they brought me here. The argument. We were in my office. The same office where I'd signed contracts worth millions, where I'd fired men twice my size for stealing, where I'd held Susan's hand for hours while she waited for biopsy results. "Dad, you're stuck in the last century," Jason said, pacing in front of my desk. "Construction is changing. There's quick money now, real money, not this slow brick-by-brick nonsense." He was 35, handsome in a spoiled sort of way, expensive watch, perfect haircut, tailored suit. He looked like success. He just hadn't earned it. "Slow brick-by-brick nonsense built this office," I reminded him. "And our house, and your education, and your car, and that watch you keep waving in my face." He rolled his eyes. "I'm not asking for a handout," he said. "I'm asking for an investment. We bring in partners, we leverage the company's assets, we move into crypto-backed real estate short-term flips." He'd been watching too many online gurus. "You want to mortgage the company I spent 40 years building," I said slowly, "for a gamble you barely understand." "It's not a gamble. I have a friend who—" "Who?" I interrupted. "That same genius who lost his restaurant in 8 months?" Jason's jaw tightened. "You think I'm an idiot?" he snapped. "I think you're impatient," I said. "And impatient men are dangerous with other people's money." He leaned on my desk, put his face close to mine. "It's not just your money," he said. "Mom's gone. You're almost 70. Do you think you'll be running around job sites at 80? This company is my future, not yours." There it was. The mask slipped for a moment and I saw the truth. Not concern, not vision, hunger. "Good," I said. "Then start from the bottom and build it, the way I did." "I have a degree," he snapped. "So did half the guys I fired," I said. "You think paper replaces sweat?" His cheeks flushed. For a second, he looked like a teenager again, the one who'd smashed my truck and blamed a hit and run. "I won't spend my life taking orders from you," he said. "Not in my own company." "It's not your company," I reminded him quietly. "Not yet." He stared at me for a long time, something cold forming in his eyes. Then he turned, left without another word, and slammed the door. That was the last time we spoke like father and son. A few days later, he showed up at my house with that private psychiatrist, a soft-spoken man in a turtleneck and thin glasses carrying a leather bag. "Dad, you've been so down," Jason said. "Just talk to him. It's just a conversation. For me." I was tired that day, missing Susan, feeling old, my chest tight from the stairs. "Fine," I'd muttered, "if it will get you off my back." The psychiatrist had asked me about my sleep, my appetite, my thoughts. Did I speak to my wife? Yes, at the grave. Did I ever wish I was with her? Sometimes, in the quiet hours, but not enough to do anything about it. Did I feel that life had lost its meaning? Yes, I'd said honestly. It lost one of its meanings, but not all. At the end, he'd smiled sadly. "You're going through complicated grief," he'd said. "I'll write a note to your son recommending monitoring. Try these pills for a week. They'll help you sleep." I took the prescription out of politeness and never bought the pills. Apparently, the note he wrote for Jason said something very different. I sat on my hospital bed, my hands trembling, my heart pounding, and realized something simple and horrifying. If I stayed here, quietly swallowing their medicine and waiting for the system to realize I was sane, I would leave this place as a poor, old, harmless man. Jason would have everything. My company, my accounts, my house, my life's work. The thought cleared the last trace of sedation from my mind. I'd been through worse. I'd built a business in a collapsing economy, fought inspectors who wanted favors, outlived partners who tried to cheat me. I'd watched my wife die and somehow kept breathing. A psychiatric hospital, a greedy son, a pack of lawyers. They were not going to be the final chapter of my life. I needed to get out. The first escape attempt was stupid. I admit that. I watched the routine for 2 days. Breakfast, medication, rounds, smoking break in the yard, lunch, silence, dinner, more pills, night. Visitors came from 4 to 6 in the afternoon. During that time, the gates opened more often. People walked in and out. Bags were checked, but not faces. Nurses ran back and forth with jackets and signatures. So at 4:15 on the third day after I woke from the fog, I put on another patient's jacket from the shared coat rack, pulled the hood up, and walked toward the exit with a group of visitors who were leaving. I almost made it. "Excuse me," a security guard said. "Let me see your pass." "I'm just visiting," I mumbled, lowering my voice. "Sure," he said. "Show me your visitor badge." Of course, I didn't have one. He grabbed my sleeve, pulled the hood back, and swore quietly. "Mr. Miller," he sighed, "you can't do this." "I'm going home," I told him. "You're going back to the ward," he corrected. "Or we can call the orderlies again. Your choice." He didn't smile. Back in the ward, the nurse's lips were pressed into a thin line. "What were you thinking?" she demanded. "That I don't belong here," I replied. She added a note to my chart. That evening my dose of tranquilizer doubled. My blood felt heavy. My legs turned to stone. My thoughts became syrup again. The second attempt was less stupid, but still unsuccessful. At night, the ward grew quiet. The nurses sat at their station, scrolling through their phones, gossiping. Every 30 minutes, one of them made a round, peeking into rooms. Between 2 and 3 in the morning, they were the most tired. The bathroom window at the end of the corridor had a rusty latch. It opened 10 centimeters, not enough to escape, but enough to see that the drain pipe ran directly down to the ground. 2 floors. Once upon a time, I'd climbed scaffolding twice that height without a second thought. Once upon a time, my knees didn't ache when I turned over in bed. Still, I waited. 1:58. The nurse walked past, glanced inside, moved on. I counted slowly to 300, then slipped into the bathroom, closed the door quietly, climbed onto the sink, pulled the window up as far as it would go, and tried to squeeze my shoulders through. I got halfway before I heard the door handle rattle. "Mr. Miller?" The nurse's voice came. "Is everything all right?" I didn't answer. I tried to force myself further out, but my ribs protested. The rusted frame scraped my skin, and my arms trembled from the effort. I was 68, not 30. The door opened. The nurse gasped. 5 minutes later, the orderlies pulled me back in like a stuck cork. "You want to kill yourself?" one of them asked angrily as they sat me back on the bed. "From this height, you'd break your legs and lie there screaming until morning." "I wasn't going to jump," I snapped out of breath. "I was going to climb down." They looked at my gray hair, my shaking hands, and didn't even bother commenting. That attempt bought me something worse than extra pills. Increased observation. They moved me to a room closer to the nurse's station. The door stayed open. A camera watched the bed. If I kept going this way, sooner or later they would fasten me to it. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the camera, and did something I hadn't done in a long time. I talked to Susan, not at her grave, not as a habit, really talked. "You would laugh at me," I whispered into the darkness. "Locked up in a psych ward because our son wants to play big businessman." The word "our" hurt my throat. "You'd say I deserved it," I went on, "for spoiling him, for always giving him another chance, for letting you smooth things over every time he made a mess." I swallowed. "But I know what you would not say. You would not say, 'Give up.' You were stubborn as a rock, Suze. You would haunt me if I lay here waiting for someone else to save me." The ceiling didn't answer, but the knot in my chest loosened. The third attempt was careful. And it worked. You learn a lot if you watch people long enough. Age gives you that patience. The cleaners came at 6 in the morning, a man and a woman. They pushed their cart down the corridor, joking quietly, the wheels squeaking. The man, a heavy fellow with sad eyes, always put his pack of cigarettes in the same pocket of his gray overcoat, which he hung on the back of a chair near the entrance to the ward. At 6:25, he went outside to smoke behind the building. The woman stayed inside, mopping. At 6:26, the nurses changed shift. For 5 minutes, the station was a blur of scrubs and hushed reports, back and forth. No one watched the corridor. I waited until the third morning, until I was sure of the timing. I took my pills but hid them under my tongue, spitting them into the toilet later. I wanted to be fully awake. At 6:24, I shuffled toward the nurses' station, hunched, slow. "My stomach," I groaned. "I think I'm going to be sick." The night nurse swore softly, grabbed gloves. "The bathroom is right there," she said. "Can you make it yourself?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Olga," she called to the cleaner, "keep an eye on him. If he faints, shout." The woman nodded sympathetically and came over with her mop. The nurse went back to handing over to the day staff. I leaned on the wall, breathing heavily, keeping my eyes half closed. At 6:25 exactly, the cleaner in the gray overcoat walked past me, the smell of cheap tobacco following him. He left his coat on the chair, stepped through the door at the end of the corridor, and disappeared down the stairs. The woman stifled a yawn and went back to her bucket. The nurses talked over each other. I counted to 10. Then I straightened. Sometimes being old helps. Everyone expects you to move slowly, to forget what you were about to do. They underestimate how quickly fear can sharpen your movements. I walked, not shuffled, but walked, straight to the chair, slid my hand into the overcoat's pocket, pulled out the big ring of keys he always carried, and turned away in one motion, tucking them into my sleeve. "Mr. Miller?" the cleaner called. "Bathroom is the other way." "I changed my mind," I muttered, doubling over again. It passed. She shrugged and went back to her mopping. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed and waited, listening. The cleaner came back minutes later. I heard him curse quietly. "Where the hell are my keys?" "You left them in the supply closet yesterday," the woman said. "Go check there." He shuffled off. Apparently, this wasn't the first time. The ring in my sleeve felt heavy and cold against my wrist. The hospital had many doors, but most used the same 3 keys. Entrance to the ward, inner corridor, side exit. The cleaners needed all of them. At 7:05, breakfast arrived. Bread, something gray that pretended to be oatmeal, lukewarm tea. People gathered in the common room. Nurses passed out trays and pills. "I don't feel well," I told the nurse as she handed me my cup. "I'll eat in my room." She barely looked at me. "Fine." They were short-staffed. The morning shift always was. I went back to my room, counted to 60, then another 60, waited until the voices in the corridor were loudest, picked up my tray, opened the door, and walked. Not toward the common room, not toward the bathroom, but toward the far end of the corridor where the service door stood. I didn't run. Old men don't run without drawing attention. I walked with my head down, as if looking for the toilet. The trick is to be invisible, not fast. No one stopped me. The service door had a simple lock. First key, no. Second, no. Third, yes. The bolt turned with a quiet click. I slipped through and closed it behind me, heart hammering. On the other side, a narrow stairwell, down, not up. The walls smelled of damp concrete and cleaning chemicals. I went down 2 flights, listening for footsteps. No one. On the ground floor, another door, another key, another click. I stepped into a corridor I hadn't seen before. Storage rooms, laundry. At the end, an emergency exit with a big red bar and the words, "Alarm will sound." Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. Either way, I had no choice. I pushed. A siren wailed shrill and angry. Far away, someone shouted. In the yard, 2 nurses froze with their cigarettes halfway to their lips, staring. For a moment, our eyes met. I didn't wait to see what they'd do. I ran. It wasn't a heroic run. My legs protested, my breath burned, my heart pounded dangerously. But I moved faster than I had in years, out through the gate the ambulance had used, onto the street, around the corner. I heard shouts behind me. Someone called my name. A security guard ran to the gate. He was young, heavy, out of shape. I'd been climbing ladders when he was still in diapers. I darted between 2 parked cars, crossed the street without looking, and disappeared into the maze of houses and side streets. I turned again, went through backyards, down alleys. My slippers slapped the asphalt. My robe flapped around my legs. People stared. Old man in a hospital gown, hair gray, face pale, running like the devil was behind him. Some laughed. No one stopped me. After 10 minutes, my lungs felt like they would burst. I leaned against a wall, panting, trying to listen. No siren, no running feet. I was alone, free, in a city where I had no phone, no money, no documents. Wearing only a thin robe and hospital slippers. Not the most comfortable freedom. But it was better than any bed in that ward. My lawyer's office was across the city, in the business district. I knew the way by car, not on foot. But I also knew the general direction. So I started walking. I found an old man smoking on a bench near a bus stop. He looked at me as if I were something dragged out of a river. "Excuse me," I said, forcing my voice not to tremble. "What time is it?" 10:30, he said cautiously. 10:30. By now, David had probably called me 100 times, called my house, called anyone he could think of. He knew something was wrong. His unfinished message told me that. "Come immediately, I'm stuck in traffic and won't make it to you in time. Your son has arranged everything so that..." "So that what?" "So that by the time we arrive, they'll have you locked up and legally incapable? So that any transaction he makes in your name cannot be challenged? So that you sign something you don't even remember?" I walked. Through neighborhoods I hadn't seen in 30 years. Past a park where children shouted on swings. Past a coffee shop where couples drank lattes, faces buried in phones. Past a construction site where young men in hard hats smoked and laughed. My legs shook. Sweat soaked the hospital robe. Twice I thought I would faint. Once I sat down on a bench and nearly didn't get up. But David's words dragged me forward. The thought of Jason in my office, in my chair, with my stamp in his hand, dragged me forward. The memory of Susan's grave, her name carved in stone, her son plotting theft on the day I brought her flowers, dragged me forward too. By the time I reached David's building, my feet were bleeding into the thin hospital slippers. The security guard at the entrance stepped in front of me. "Sir, you can't..." "Call David Lawson," I rasped. "Tell him his client Robert Miller is downstairs, right now. If you don't, I collapse here and the paramedics will ask you why you refuse to let an old man see his lawyer." He hesitated, took in my clothes, my face, my eyes. Then he picked up the phone. 2 minutes later, David appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him 3 weeks ago. His tie was crooked, his hair disheveled. When he saw me, his face went through 3 colors, white, red, gray. "Robert," he whispered. "My God, how did you—" "Don't ask," I said. "Get me upstairs. And for the love of all things holy, lock the door behind us." He put his arm around my shoulders, half supporting me. The security guard's eyes followed us, wide and nervous. In David's office, he fetched a blanket, wrapped it around my shoulders, poured water. My hands trembled so badly the glass rattled against my teeth. "I tried to warn you," he said finally, sinking into the chair opposite. But they were faster. I saw your message, I said. Part of it. Before they grabbed me. Your son has arranged everything so that... So that what? So that by the time I came, you were already in the psychiatric hospital under an emergency order, David finished quietly, and the court had issued temporary guardianship to him over your affairs. The room swayed. I gripped the glass. Explain, I said. He opened a folder on his desk. Inside were copies of documents, court stamps, signatures, statements. 2 weeks ago, he began, Jason came to see me. Without you. He said you were deteriorating, that you were making risky decisions at the company, that you talked about wanting to die since Susan's death. He asked about the legal process for protecting you from yourself. I told him the only way to limit your rights would be through a court, but that judges didn't like these cases unless there was serious medical evidence. He found serious medical evidence, I muttered. David nodded grimly. He took you to a private psychiatrist. The man wrote a report saying you were severely depressed with suicidal ideation, possible paranoid features. I have a copy. He slid a paper in front of me. I stared at my name under words that did not belong to me. Then Jason went to court with a petition for temporary guardianship. He attached the report plus statements from 2 of your employees that you'd been confused at meetings and talking to your dead wife. If I find out who signed those, I'll fire them so hard their grandchildren will feel it, I said. David's mouth twitched, but he didn't smile. The judge hesitated, he went on. Guardian petitions are serious, so Jason brought more. Bank statements showing you transferred a large sum to charity last month, which he called impulsive. A video secretly recorded on his phone where you argued about money and said, "I'm tired of this life." I was tired of listening to his nonsense, I hissed. Context doesn't show on paper, David said. The judge gave him temporary control over your major transactions, pending a full psychiatric evaluation. Jason wanted more. He wanted you to sign a power of attorney giving him full rights over the company and your assets. He scheduled a meeting with me for the day they took you. I remembered the call from David, the appointment he'd insisted on. I'd postponed it to visit Susan's grave first. It seemed important then. It still did. Today, David continued, I was on my way to your house when I got a notification from the bank. Large transfers from your company's account to a new entity Jason had registered in his name. Then another alert. Attempts to change ownership documents on your house and some commercial properties. They needed your signature, not a guardian's. So Jason did something clever and illegal. He took out another paper, the photocopy of a court order. Emergency involuntary psychiatric admission. Under this order, David pointed, if a person is considered an immediate danger to himself, he can be admitted for 72 hours without his consent. During that time, his legal capacity is flexible. Doctors can sign certain things on his behalf if they believe it's in his best interest. I stared at him. You're saying, I said slowly, he wanted me drugged and declared incompetent so they could sign my property over while I was drooling in a pillow? Yes, David said simply. I was trying to get to you before they came. But they moved faster. I was still stuck in traffic when the ambulance left for the cemetery. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. Why the cemetery? I asked. Symbolic, probably, or convenient. He told them you were prone to self-harm when visiting your wife's grave. It looks more dramatic in the paperwork. He told them... My throat closed. This wasn't just greed. This wasn't a heated argument about business. This was a planned, cold operation. How much did he manage to take? I forced out. Not everything, David said. He's arrogant, but not stupid. He knew sudden movement of all funds would draw attention. He started with a big chunk, enough to fund his new venture. Fortunately, the bank recognized unusual activity and flagged it. They froze part of the money pending verification. How much is frozen? I asked. About 40%, he said. The rest is still in your accounts, for now. But as long as he is your court-appointed temporary guardian, he can keep trying. No, I said. He can't. David watched me, eyes tired. Robert, you just escaped from a psychiatric hospital, he said. Right now, on paper, you're exactly what he says you are. Unstable. If you go to the police, they'll see the court order, the psychiatrist's report, and an old man in a hospital robe screaming about betrayal. Guess who they'll believe? I leaned forward. I'm not going to the police like this, I said. First, we freeze everything, every account, every asset. If I have to stop the whole company for a month, I will. Then we go to the police together, with documents, with your testimony, with evidence that my son conspired with a doctor to fake my condition. David hesitated. Are you sure you want to press criminal charges? He asked quietly. He is your son. Was Susan my wife? I shot back. Yes. She spent her last months worrying that Jason would be alone when we were gone, that he'd have no one to support him. She cried at night because she thought we hadn't raised him strong enough. I swallowed. If she could see what he's done, she would ask me why I didn't stop him sooner. David exhaled slowly. All right, he said. First thing, the bank. I'll call the director personally. I'll tell him you're here, that you escaped illegal confinement. We'll set a block on all outgoing transfers until further notice. Do it, I said. He picked up the phone. For the next hour, the office turned into a war room. David on the phone with the bank, with the company's CFO, with the county recorder. Me sitting there in a hospital robe, wrapped in a blanket, listening to my life being fought for in numbers and legal phrases. By noon, the accounts were frozen. The recorder's office placed a note on my properties. No transfers permitted pending investigation. The CFO, a loyal man who'd been with me 20 years, almost cried when he heard my voice. Boss, they told us you'd had a breakdown, he stammered. Jason came in with papers, said you wanted to retire, that he was taking over. I didn't believe it, but the court order... Don't do anything else without my direct instruction, I told him. Not one signature, not one payment over routine salaries. Understood? Yes, boss, he said. After that, we called the police. We asked not for a patrol, not for advice, but for the detective division that deals with financial crimes and abuse of power. I told my story. Calmly, without shouting, without tears. I told them about the psychiatrist's visit, about the fight, about the cemetery, about the hospital. David showed them copies of the guardianship petition, the emergency order, the bank alerts. One of the detectives, a woman with sharp eyes, flipped through the documents. Your son is ambitious, she remarked dryly. He's criminal, I corrected. She nodded once. We'll open a case, she said. We'll need your official statement, and we'll need to talk to the hospital staff. You'll also need to detain my son, I said. He'll run if he understands what's happening. We don't have grounds to detain him yet, she replied. But we can bring him in for questioning and seize his devices. That might be enough to discourage sudden trips abroad. Do it today, I said. She looked at David. He nodded. We'll do what we can, she said. In the meantime, Mr. Miller, you need a doctor to re-examine you. A real one, independent. If another psychiatrist confirms you're competent, we can challenge the court order that gave your son guardianship. I'll bring one, David said. The rest of that day passed in a blur of statements, signatures, calls. A second psychiatrist from another clinic examined me in David's office. He asked the same questions as the first, but this time I could see in his eyes that he was actually listening. At the end, he shook my hand. You're not insane, he said. You're angry and exhausted, reasonably so. I'll write that you are fully capable of making decisions. Thank you, I said. That doesn't mean you should not rest, he added. You've been through a lot. My heart can rest when my son is in handcuffs, I said. He frowned but didn't argue. By evening, the detective, her name was Ramirez, called. "We visited your company," she said. "Your son was there. He was surprised to hear you were not in the hospital." I could imagine his face. "We seized his computer and phone," she went on. "We also have the private psychiatrist in for questioning. His report on you is inconsistent with his usual style. If we prove he falsified it knowingly, he'll be in trouble too." "Good," I said. "When will you arrest my son?" "Mr. Miller," she said carefully, "this isn't a movie. We need to build the case. Right now we have illegal deprivation of liberty, abuse of the psychiatric system, attempted fraud, and attempted misappropriation of property. Strong, but we must tie him directly to each step. It will take time." "How much time?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. I closed my eyes. "We'll keep an eye on him," she said. "He won't go far, especially since his access to money is suddenly limited." I hung up and sat there in the quiet office. David, pale with fatigue, poured 2 small glasses of cognac. "The doctor said you shouldn't," he murmured, handing one to me. "That was a general recommendation," I replied. "Today is an exception." We drank in silence. "Do you regret pressing charges?" he asked after a while. "Ask me when this is over," I said. "Right now, I regret ever putting that boy in an expensive school." He almost smiled. The next few weeks turned my life into an ugly court drama. The hospital staff confirmed that Jason had insisted on my admission, had provided the paperwork, had pressured them to medicate me quickly. The private psychiatrist, faced with the possibility of losing his license and gaining a criminal record, started talking. Yes, Jason had asked him to exaggerate my condition. Yes, he'd received an envelope for his trouble. The bank provided logs of all attempted transfers. The emails from Jason's work account showed that he'd already negotiated with partners to move my company's funds into their joint venture. It was all there, in black and white. Jason was summoned for questioning several times. At first, he played the concerned son. "My father has been unstable since my mother died," he told them. "He talks to her as if she were alive. He says he's tired of living. I just wanted to protect him and our family's assets from his own state." He even tried to look wounded when he saw me in the hallway of the police station. "Dad," he said, reaching out, "they told me you escaped. You could have hurt yourself. Why didn't you call me?" "If I'd called you," I said, "I'd be back in that hospital. Or worse." We stood there, father and son. 2 men with the same bone structure, the same eyes, looking at each other across a gulf that had not existed a month ago. "You think I did this to hurt you?" he asked quietly. "I did it to save what you built. You're not young anymore. You're making mistakes. You can't see it, but—" "Save it for the judge," I said. His face hardened. "You're actually going to go through with this," he said. "You're going to drag your own son through court like some thief." "I'm not dragging you," I replied. "You walked there yourself." The trial took almost a year. It was in that sterile courtroom, under buzzing fluorescent lights, that the last illusions died. I had known Jason was selfish. I had known he was impatient. I had not known how easily he could lie. He sat at the defendant's table, in a neat suit, next to his lawyer. He told the court that he'd only wanted what was best for me, that he'd been afraid I would squander my fortune on charities and bad deals, that he'd misunderstood the process, that he hadn't realized the private psychiatrist had exaggerated, that the transfers to his new company were preparatory, not theft. The prosecutor played the recordings from the psychiatrist's confession, showed the emails where Jason wrote, "Once he's in the ward, we move fast," to his friend, presented the bank logs with the scheduled transfers labeled extraction. Then they brought me to the stand. "How do you feel testifying against your son?" the defense lawyer asked, trying to sound sympathetic. "Like a man who finally stopped closing his eyes," I said. "For years I excused his behavior. I told myself he'd grow up. My wife told herself the same. She's in the ground now. I owe her honesty." The lawyer pursed his lips. "Isn't it true," he asked, "that you stated you were tired of living?" "Many times," I said. "Usually after listening to my son's business plans." A few people in the courtroom laughed before the judge glared at them. "In all seriousness," I added, "grief is not madness. Missing your wife is not grounds to steal your father's company. If it were, half the men in this country would be in psych wards and their sons would be rich." In the end, the court found him guilty. Illegal deprivation of liberty, conspiracy with a licensed physician to falsify a medical report, attempted fraud on a large scale, abuse of guardianship. He got 5 years. When they read the sentence, Jason turned to me, eyes blazing. "You're happy now?" he shouted. "You destroyed your own son." The guard took him by the arm. "I didn't destroy you," I said quietly. "I stopped you from destroying yourself." He spat on the floor and was led away. For the first months of his imprisonment, he didn't write. I didn't visit. I followed the case papers, dealt with the company, and tried to fill the crater he'd left. We untangled the financial mess. Some clients pulled their contracts, afraid of scandal. Others stayed, trust in me outweighing gossip. I went back to the office, sat in my old chair, and worked like I had 20 years earlier. Exhausting, yes. But there was a strange relief in it. A clear purpose. At home, the silence felt different. Less like the numb quiet after Susan's death, and more like the wary calm after a storm. I visited her grave, told her what had happened. "You always said I was too soft," I murmured, arranging the roses. "You were right. Don't get used to it." 6 months into Jason's sentence, the first letter arrived. It was short, angry, full of accusations. I tore it in half and threw it away. 3 months later, another came, less angry, more lost. He asked about the company, about some mutual acquaintances. He didn't apologize. I didn't answer. A year after his imprisonment, Detective Ramirez called me. "Your son is doing well in the rehabilitation program," she said. "He joined the work crew, attends group sessions. The prison psychologist says he's changing." "Prison psychologists always say that," I replied. "Sometimes it's true," she said quietly. Around that time, I received another letter. This one was different. "Dad," it began. Not Robert, not dear father, just Dad. I sat at the kitchen table, took off my glasses, and read. He didn't justify himself. He didn't speak about the company. He wrote about the cell, the noise, the smell of sweat and cheap cigarettes, the way time stretches in a place where every day is the same, the faces of men who had done worse things than him and didn't think they'd done anything wrong. "I came here thinking I was better than them," he wrote, "that I was only here because you betrayed me. The first time a guy laughed in my face and said, 'You stole from your own father and still think you're a saint,' I wanted to hit him. I still wanted to blame you. Everyone but myself." He wrote about group sessions where other inmates spoke about the first time they'd crossed a line, thinking they could always step back later. "I realized I crossed mine long before the hospital," he wrote, "when I first lied to you about where the money went, when I let Mom smooth things over instead of facing what I'd done." The last lines were blurred, as if the pen had paused too long. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he wrote. "I don't know if I can forgive myself, but I need you to know something. You were right. You didn't destroy me. I did. You just showed everyone the ruins." I sat there a long time with that letter in my hands. Susan's picture on the shelf seemed to watch me. "Maybe he finally woke up," I muttered to her. "You always said he would. Eventually. You were annoyingly optimistic, you know that?" The next week I visited him. The prison visiting room smelled of disinfectant and cheap coffee. Metal tables, plastic chairs. Guards along the walls. When he walked in, he looked smaller. Not physically, he'd actually gained some muscle, but in his posture. He didn't wear an expensive watch. He didn't have gel in his hair. He had a shaved head and a number on his chest. "Dad?" he said. I nodded. We sat. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. A man at the next table laughed loudly at something his visitor said. A child cried on the other side of the room. "You look older," Jason said finally. "So do you," I replied. He smiled weakly. "What do you want?" I asked. My voice came out harsher than intended. He flinched. I wanted to say... He stopped, swallowed. "Thank you. For testifying." I stared at him. "They said prison changes people," I said dryly. "I didn't know it turned them into comedians." He shook his head. "I'm serious," he said. If you'd let me get away with it, I would have done worse. To you, to others. I thought I was entitled to everything you built. I thought I was smarter than you." He looked around at the walls. "Now my roommate is a guy who stole car stereos his whole life. Turns out greed looks the same in every social class." I said nothing. "I know I can't undo what I did," he continued. "I know saying I'm sorry doesn't fix it. But I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry, Dad. For the hospital. For the money. For everything before that. For Mom." He pressed his palms together on the table, as if praying. "I didn't even go to her grave this year," he whispered. "Because I knew if I asked you to bring me, you'd say no." His voice broke. For the first time since he was a child, I saw him cry. Something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a crack in the wall I had built. "Your mother would have been furious," I said quietly. He laughed wetly. "I know," he said. "She would have come here, grabbed me by the ear, and dragged me home." We sat in silence. "What are your plans?" I asked finally. "When you get out?" He shrugged. "Work," he said. "Any work. After this sentence, no one will give me a managerial position. I thought maybe construction. You always said there's no shame in honest labor. Only in theft." "You remember something useful after all," I murmured. I left that day without making any promises. But I did visit again. And again. The prosecutors didn't oppose early release after he'd served 3 years. With good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs, they said, he'd earned the chance. The judge agreed. On the day he walked out of the prison gates carrying a small bag with his things, I was waiting in the parking lot. He saw me and stopped. The sunlight was too bright. He squinted. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know," I replied. "Get in the car." He hesitated only a second, then opened the passenger door. We drove in silence for a while. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Home," I said. He shifted uneasily. "If this is another test," he began. "It is," I said. "Just not the kind you think." We stopped first at a small clothing store. I gave him some money. "Buy work clothes," I said. "Nothing fancy. Jeans, shirts, boots. You start at the warehouse tomorrow, 6 in the morning." He blinked. "At the company?" he asked. "After everything I did?" "You thought I'd put you in the director's chair?" I asked. "No, you're not even close to earning that. You'll load trucks, check materials, sweep floors. You'll get a basic salary like any other worker. You'll have no access to accounts, no access to contracts, no access to anything important." He nodded slowly. "And if you show up late," I added, "the warehouse manager will fire you, not me." "That's fair," he said quietly. "Nothing about this is fair," I corrected. "Fair would have been you in that psychiatric bed and me in your office, signing your house away. Life is rarely fair. I'm giving you a chance, not justice." He swallowed. "I'll take it," he said. At home I showed him to the guest room, the room where Susan's sister used to stay. Clean sheets, a simple wardrobe. "You can stay here," I said, "until you save enough to rent your own place, on conditions." He looked up. "No drinking," I said. "No friends with quick, rich schemes. Curfew at 11 like you're 16 again. You give me your payslip every month so I know you're not hiding anything. You don't complain." He nodded. And one more thing, I added. Yes. Every Sunday, we go to your mother's grave, I said. Together. His eyes filled again. He nodded. The first months were strange. Watching your grown son trudge out of the house at 5:30 in the morning, half asleep, lunchbox in hand, is very different from watching him put on an expensive suit and drive off in a leased car you paid for. He came home tired, sometimes with blisters on his hands, sometimes with a bruise from bumping into a pallet. He smelled of dust and sweat and oil. He didn't complain. The warehouse manager, a gruff man named Frank, who'd worked for me for 25 years, took me aside after a week. He's clumsy, Frank said. Soft, but he listens. Hit him if he doesn't, I said. I'd rather not go to jail at my age, Frank muttered, but I'll yell. On Sundays, we drove to the cemetery. At first, Jason stood a little apart, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. Over time, he started talking. Needed to talk. Hi, Mom, he would begin awkward. I'm trying. I let him have his conversations alone. I took a few steps back, giving them privacy, even if one of them was underground. At the company, I made some changes. I restructured ownership. I created a trust that would inherit the business if I died. The trust's rules were clear. No one person could control everything. The company had to remain in the hands of people who worked in it, not those who counted money from afar. Jason was written into the documents, but not as owner. As potential beneficiary, under strict conditions, no criminal activity, no gambling debts, no attempts to seize power by force. With these rules, David said when we signed the final version, your son could never do this to you again. With these rules, I replied, my grandchildren, if they ever exist, will have to learn what work is. Months passed. Jason's shoulders broadened. His face aged. There was still something of the old arrogance in him, but it had dulled, replaced by something like humility, or maybe just fatigue. One evening we sat in the kitchen after dinner. The TV hummed quietly in the background. I did my crossword. He stared at his hands. Dad, he said suddenly. Yes. If you could go back, he asked, to that first big fight we had about the company, would you do something different? Yes, I said. He looked up quickly, surprised. I would have thrown you out of the office sooner, I said. Made you start in the warehouse then already. Maybe then you would have learned to value what we have. Maybe we would have avoided all of this. He nodded slowly. Would you still call the police? He asked after a moment. I put my pen down. Yes, I said. That part I wouldn't change. He took that blow without flinching this time. Good, he said quietly, because if you hadn't, I would still be the same man I was then, and I hate that man. We sat in silence. You know, I said after a minute, when they grabbed me at the cemetery, I thought I'd reached the point where nothing worse could happen to me than losing your mother. I was wrong. He winced. And yet, I went on, here we are, eating soup, doing crosswords, going to work at 6 in the morning. Life is stubborn. He smiled faintly. I don't know if I deserve this, he admitted. You don't, I said, but I'm giving it to you anyway. Not because of what you deserve, because of who I am, and because of who your mother wanted you to be. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I'll try not to waste it, he said. Years from now, maybe I'll know whether I was right. Maybe one day he'll move from the warehouse to the office. Not because he's my son, but because he's earned it. Maybe he'll sit in my chair, not as a thief, but as a man who understands what it took to build this place. Or maybe he'll always remain the man carrying boxes, proof that some mistakes leave you in the basement forever. I don't know. I only know one thing. That day at the cemetery, when my phone buzzed with David's unfinished message and 3 orderlies grabbed my arms, my life could have ended in that hospital bed. Not physically, perhaps, but in every other way. Instead, I escaped. I walked half the city in a hospital robe and bleeding slippers. I froze my accounts, testified against my own blood, and watched my son go to prison. People ask if I regret it, if, at night, I lie awake thinking I should have protected him rather than the company. I visit Susan's grave every Sunday, often now with Jason beside me. We stand there side by side in silence. If I listen closely, I can almost hear her voice, dry and sharp as always. "About time you finally acted like a father, Rob," she seems to say. Not a sponsor, a father. When we leave, Jason always touches the stone gently with his fingertips. "See you next week, Mom," he whispers. And for the first time in a long time, when I walk away from that grave, I don't feel like I'm leaving my whole life behind me. Some of it walks beside me, damaged, scarred, but still mine.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.